Welcome back to another episode of the Life Sciences Professional Podcast. Today, our guest is Ralph Hess, who is the Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing at the Navigator Business Solutions. It's a computer software company that provides cloud-based ERP systems that helps companies build their businesses. I'm excited to have Ralph as a guest today because I think he's going to share lots of information for startup, mid-size, and large organizations in the life sciences and other businesses who happen to tune into our channel. Thanks so much for joining. Well, Ralph, thank you so much for joining us today. I know our listeners will be very excited to hear everything that you can share with us. You have a tremendous amount of experience helping companies solve business problems with technology. And you're very well known in the SAP Eco System, just based on all your years of experience. 30, I believe it is.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Time that has gone by very quickly.
Yeah. And you're currently the VP of Sales and Marketing at Navigator Business Solutions, a computer software company that provides cloud-based ERP business solutions. So we'll talk about that. And expand on that. I'm really excited to learn more about what your organization does and has been doing for businesses. And I know that your team helps businesses grow exponentially. We're very familiar with cloud-based, as you know. So yes. Before we get started, if you don't mind just introducing yourself, telling the listeners a bit about yourself professionally, personally, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on this podcast. It's we're always very excited to share our experience within the industry and about SAP and properly positioning that within customers, because there's usually a thought that SAP is too big for small companies. So throughout our conversation, I'll be able to help educate the listeners a little bit on that. So personally, been married to the same beautiful woman for 40 years and have 2 great sons and 6 grandchildren. So that's why I'm happy most of the time. The family life I have is a wonderful thing, which makes me even better at work. So yes, as you indicated, Linda, I've been in the industry for 30 years. In and out of the regulated industry space, primarily around supply chain, doing business consulting, systems consulting, advisory type services. So it's been a wonderful 30 years of seeing a lot of different businesses go through a lot of different technological transitions. If you think back over 30 years, the landscape of technology has changed, so that not only do you have more power on your iPhone than you had back 30 years ago on a mainframe computer, but you just have so many more tools available to you because of that technological evolution, shall we say. So it's been a wonderful ride, and I really enjoy what I do and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks. I appreciate you coming. One of the things I know that when I learned more about you, and I've read and listened to other podcasts and so forth that you've done, I noticed that you have a tag or a saying that you have, and it's technology for business sake.
That's
right.
I
really like that because I thought, that's pretty catchy. That's fantastic. Can you share the story behind that, but why you say that?
Oh, sure. It goes way back in the Wayback Machine. When I was originally in technology, I started out as a programmer, and I was mentored by what I would call an old guy, who is now my age. That's the age I am now. So I'm now the old guy. But I was showing him one of my programs, and he said, don't fall in love with your program. Don't fall in love with the code or how it looks. Fall in love with solving the business problem. He says, always keep the business problem you're trying to solve at the center and keep everything else simple. So it just that kind of brought to my mind, okay, so we're really doing technology for business sake, not just technology to be involved with technology or the latest, coolest things. Because sometimes the best solution to the problem is the simplest, and it may be low tech, right? I mean, it's as you take a look at it, you don't have to bring a jackhammer to nail in a nail. You can just use a hammer nicely. So that's just kind of what it's really all about for us. And that's really at Navigator Business Solutions, as I lead the sales and solutioning team, that's really the approach we take. So we take a look at what the business problem is, what the business pain is, what try to align that with the objectives of the organization, and put a platform in place that allows them to use what we call the crawl, walk, run approach, which is you don't have to solve for everything on the first bite, right? You can go ahead and get things running as is. Just get a simple solution in place that allows them to reliably and predictably execute on their business model, and then they can scale and grow into more advanced technology as the requirements, dictate.
Well, and it's interesting. I've worked with hospitals where we had nothing, like no technology whatsoever, as a nurse, writing everything down, and then working with medical companies and going through all sorts of different systems like SAP and so forth. And I'm married to a programmer as well, a techie per se. He's my technical background. And starting the company that we've been in business for 22 years, we've evolved over time, just as you've said, companies, the technology that was available 22 years ago when we first started compared to where we are now, cloud-based, is very different. And you either embrace it or you don't, you're left behind. So maybe for some of our listeners who aren't really familiar, they've heard cloud-based, they don't really know what it is, but if you could maybe talk a bit about that, because it's, so hard for some people to really grasp the concept, and just expand on that.
Sure. Well, really, it's multifaceted, right? It's the technological portion of it. It's intended to, simplify that, the whole nature of a solution. So no longer do you have to, as a small to mid-sized company, buy all the servers, hire the technicians to run all the networks and the servers in your own building. You're really outsourcing that, and you're just paying a monthly fee for that. And that's commonly known as hosting, right? That's been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. When people decided to say, hey, I'm going to outsource kind of my systems administration and that type of thing. What cloud really does is bundles that with the delivery of business applications. So now I'm not only is my software is also hosted up in the cloud, right? In the cloud it's not a place. Michael Dell said it one time, which was cloud isn't a place, it's a way of doing IT. It's now everything is being managed in an outsourced facility in a way that you could never afford as an individual business. As you look at cyber crime and that type of thing, all of the security that you're getting out of being in the cloud is far greater than you could ever afford if you were hosting it yourself on premise. So cloud is really just the concept of I'm going to pay a monthly fee to access the technology I need to be able to run my business. And so it's intended to simplify the process of being able to have a good business platform in place. It makes it more affordable for people over the long haul.
Great. That's fantastic. I noticed that you work with lots of different organizations, industries, mm-hmm. and we'll talk about why life sciences in a minute, but tell us about the industry sort of that you work with and the depth and breadth of what you do.
Sure, absolutely. So life sciences we'll absolutely get to, because that's really one of our primary vertical industries. But over the course of time, of our 15 years of existence, we've had quite a bit of success in consumer products. We've had two very recognizable customers. One is Harry's Razors, that we actually took from a startup and helped them scale on a SAP ERP solution. And we'll get to that as well. Not the big SAP solution, but a solution that's intended for small to mid-sized businesses. We helped them scale on that, and they have eventually then grown as they've become closer to going public. And they're a very large international brand at this point. So that's one area, the consumer products type industry. We've also had a lot of luck in kind of industrial component manufacturing as well, and professional services. So those are really just a few of the types of categories where we deploy this cloud-based technology and this cloud-based way of doing things, and with a lot of success, as people have taken a look at their organizations, and as oftentimes it's a new CFO or a new executive who comes in and says, wait a minute, we've been doing the same thing for 20 years. The things have changed. We now need to embrace the new way of doing things, and get rid of all the customizations and all the programming that we have that we think is special, but is so expensive to maintain. And let's go with a cloud-based solution with best practices. Let's do things the way that they're normally done in industry, and put our focus more on what is important to our business, which isn't, nobody ever makes money by maintaining their own software, right? They make money by being enabled to go out and sell more or prove their value or innovate. So really what we consider the platforms, regardless of industry, right? Consumer products, professional services, industrial manufacturing, or life sciences, it's all intended to be enabling. Take the worry and the concerns and complexity out of running the business so that the focus can be on what the core business is.
And so life sciences, you mentioned, is a main area of focus for your business. What is it about life sciences that you recognize was a great area for you to focus on helping businesses grow?
Well, first off, it's a very cool industry to be involved in, right? I mean, It's just so interesting and in a lot of cases rewarding, because a number of our customers are out there trying to cure rare diseases, produce vaccines for underserviced portions of the population, et cetera. So just the types of customers and people we're involved with is super interesting. But it was about 5 years ago when we landed our first account, and part of it was that it was a company that was in clinical trials that was then looking at, okay, we're about to gain our approval and now we need to worry about commercialization. And that's a vastly different environment than the clinical trial where, okay, we're keeping track of things, but the focus is still primarily on the science. Now, typically that's the point that they'll bring in a CFO, and a CFO is saying, well, wait a minute now we need to start really putting an accounting system in place, a supply chain for acquiring materials and manufacturing for producing our products, whether it's med device or pharmaceuticals or viral vector manufacturing. And that's the point at which we were able to learn enough about the industry. So really it was a learning opportunity for us at that point, and understand that the solution that we have, which is SAP cloud-based ERP, is a really good fit for those industries. It's lightweight, so it doesn't take up a lot of the complex, doesn't require a lot of their time to either implement or run, so that they can continue to focus on the science or the innovation, creativity that they want. But it's also readily, it's structured in such a way that it complies to various FDA regulations, right? So 21 CFR Part 11 is usually the primary concern around the validation of computerized systems. And so the solutions that we provide, we actually provide wraparound validation services as well, that help customers just kind of, really purchase a package that they can just say, okay, this needs to be implemented. We're involved to an extent, and then we're up and running.
So I have a couple questions from that that just come to my mind.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That was a very long explanation.
Yeah. So you mentioned they can purchase a package. So you have a standard package that, a smaller startup or a company that's wanting to expand. Is that a package that also larger organizations would use, or you find that that's a standard package for more startup growth phase organizations?
That's a really good question. What we do is the solutions that we sell have a great deal of capabilities unto themselves. They're called a suite in a box. So most everything you need to run a business is included in the subscription that you pay to SAP. What we do is we package up the implementation scripts and templates in such a way that for a startup organization who just needs to get financials and perhaps procurement in place, we have a package that says, okay, for a very low cost, you can implement this part of it. Now, when you are ready to start tracking inventory, it isn't a matter of buying more software. It's a matter of just engaging and then configuring that part of the system. So what you're doing is just really constantly growing into the solution that you originally purchased. So the package can be this, it's the same software that, I think I told you the story of one of our customers started out with 18 employees in Huntsville, Alabama, in a plant that they purchased from a large pharma. And they're now operating 5 plants in 3 countries. It's all on the same software that they started with. They haven't had to purchase another lick of software. It's just a matter of configuring in the capabilities that you need as your organization gets more complex.
Right. And so what have you found to be sort of the biggest hurdle when you're approaching the industry that you might have found maybe different from other industries?
Yeah, it is very different than going into a consumer products company because the stakeholders are vastly different. So the stakeholders in a consumer products company is probably the CFO, it's probably the chief revenue officer, and maybe the CEO, right? And they're the ones who are going to say how things are going to run. When you talk to a life science organization, the key stakeholder at the table is regulatory. The quality people, the regulatory people, it's almost like a wall you need to get through before you can talk to anybody else. And that makes sense, right? Because in a regulated industry, compliance is so important. If you're not compliant, you're putting the business at risk. So really, as we're approaching those folks in kind of the quality or the regulatory space, we need to go through a process of assuring them that the solution that we're going to be talking to the rest of the business about passes their muster. So it can pass the validation, it can pass the rigors of an audit. So we just have some success stories that we talk about that, and we'll actually have them talk to the regulatory people at our existing customers, so that they can be, they have a big stake in making sure that whatever platform goes in is able to, meet the rigors of what the quality systems are that they put in place. So I would say that's one of the biggest challenges. The other challenge is really change management in terms of putting a system in. The people in the life science environment are usually the practitioners, the scientists are usually very technically oriented, and they are used to doing things the way that they do them because they've achieved success. So again, from a regulatory perspective, they're doing it consistently, repeatably, right? So it passes any regulatory inspection. They have their own way of doing things in their own creativity for perhaps saying, well, I'm going to track this on a spreadsheet because that works for me, right? And somebody else is going to create an access program and track it that way. And so when you start to come in and talk about, we're going to put this all on one platform, there's no more siloed systems. There is oftentimes a prove it type moment where we need to actually walk them through the software and illustrate the benefits of an entirely connected enterprise. So that rather than having them have their spreadsheet and then have to send somebody an email to say, hey, I need more of this reagent or I need more of this component, the system is understanding already that you need to do that. So guess what? You're no longer maintaining data. You're free to practice your whatever the profession is that you're practicing.
Well, it is that, it's a risk adverse, right? It's have a tendency to be risk adverse in the first place. Or, even I know myself, when we've gone through different evolutions of the technology we use in our organization, and each time, whether it was the CRM system or, switching to cloud-based, whatever it was, or even before that, and all of a sudden the system would go down and, you're changing your providers there because it would impact me in terms of how I could do my business. Sometimes just the thought of doing something different or something I didn't understand, you're kind of, you're resistant. However, because I had previous experience of knowing, it's okay, or it really wasn't my area of expertise, I had to trust, right? That,
or your partner whispering in your ear that it's going to be okay. Right?
Yeah, like it's, and, but also too, understanding that, that is the way business needs to be done. Like you need the systems and the process and people to be successful, right?
Exactly.
And because I'm in the people business, and that is what I educate my customers on, as well as, smaller companies, about putting in systems, processes, and people that, so I understand it, but sometimes being on the receiving end of it, it would be like a bit of a hiccup,
Yes.
or you think, oh gosh, I got to go through that learning curve. So everybody feels it. But so from the end user perspective, so it's one thing getting it through the door and getting the agreement on the key decision makers. What's next in terms of how to get those individuals that might be impacted by it or feel like they're going to be impacted?
Yeah.
Like
so
business.
how do we drive adoption is what
Yes,
you're really
exactly.
asking, right? Because it's you mentioned CRM, and those are the hardest systems to get adopted, because we salespeople are very difficult to get along with, and we want to do. If you think that there's people
Really?
who want to do things their own way, that really is the community that does it, right?
Yeah.
So the approach that we take is really a best practices approach. And so when we're talking to the company, from the minute we start talking to them, what we talk about is, you may do things a particular way, but in the industry, there are some best practices. And so what we're always leaning on is, okay, there's a best practice for order to cash. There's a best practice for a procure to pay. And so let us walk you through those. And so what we do is, rather than ask them, hey, how do you do this? We show them, this is how it's done. And so in doing it that way, and having them accept up front that we may start doing things a different way, but it's going to make it easier. We demonstrate that it's easier when we're going through this workshop process. Now, that's not to say we win all minds and hearts on the first pass, right? There's usually somebody sitting in the background saying, it's not going to work for us. That's not going to work for us. That's realistic, right? And so there may be a configuration change that needs to be made, right? There may be something that is literally somebody's secret sauce of why they do something that's a differentiator for them in the marketplace. And so we'll accommodate that. But what we want to do is have at least an 80 to 85% fit with what the best practices are. And that will generally, because it's repeatable, right? The things that we talked about earlier, right? Because it's understandable, it's repeatable, and it's consistent. And if you prove that to people, they're like, okay, so that's fine, that'll work. And the documentation is great. We template things in the life science language specific to the different micro vertical industries. So we're usually talking to people in terms that they're used to. So we're not telling them, here's how you manufacture a bicycle. Here's how you batch, here's how you process your intermediate, and here's how you fill, or, those types of things. Those are the types of terms we're using. So when you talk about the systems and the process, you're right, that's two components. The people are the critical third, and gaining their trust as part of the process is probably one of the most important things in gaining their adoption.
Right. And so in the life sciences industry, where have you touched on as far as customer base, and you've been successful? Medical device, robotics, pharmaceutical,
CDMOs, right? Contract manufacturers, contract drug manufacturers, viral vector manufacturing, vaccine development, pharma, gene therapy. Those are really the top, what I'll call biotech or pharma type industries that we've touched on, primarily in the US. We've had some inquiries from Canada. Those companies in the US have production facilities in France and Germany, the UK. So we are fine with going international. A number of our customers in their early stages were running clinical trials in Europe. So we're very well equipped to be able to operate that way. The solutions that we provide through SAP are multinational, multi-entity, so it's very well suited for kind of a global type company. And really, as we take a look at it, most of our customers are very aspirational, right? They want to create their med device, they want to create their compound, they want to create their, their cure, and they want to take that usually to the world. They don't want to just, their mission is their mission, right? It's to eradicate disease, to provide devices that provide relief and cures to people, and they're generally looking to do that in a multinational way.
And in terms of how they find you, or how, what have you been doing? You're going to conferences, reaching out to them? Is it word of mouth? Like, how is the life science?
Yeah, it's really multifaceted. I should have my marketing guy on here, but we were just talking about this earlier. So it really is a mix. We obviously do some conferences. We're participating in Bio 2023 in Boston this year. We did Bio 2022 last year. That was a really good event for us. It allowed us to really gain a little bit more visibility in the biotech industry. We're doing podcasts, right? So kind of thought leadership stuff like this. We're doing blogs, LinkedIn. We're doing outreach in a couple of different ways through LinkedIn programs, through email programs. I have business development reps as well, and we're buying lists and doing outreach based upon the list and business intelligence we get.
Great. And in terms of CEOs or founders that are looking to grow their business and haven't yet kind of stepped into the cloud-based technology, what would you say to them in terms of if they're considering and they're frustrated with the current systems, they're not, things aren't connecting and they're disconnected. A lot of it, and I will tell you, in the medical device industry, as an example, there are a lot of companies that are merging and being acquired, right? Mm-hmm. And I've seen so much of that in the last, I'd say, 24 months. We seem to have some flows of that.
Yeah, but I think as the venture community is pulling back on their investment, right, I think that there's going to naturally be a consolidation.
Yeah, but I even mean there's a lot of venture capitalists investing in the medical industry, and it's still continuing. Mm-hmm. So they're in the tech world. Things are a little challenged right now, but there's an awful lot of acquisitions happening. Yeah. So you look at that, and you're bringing all these different companies together, and they've got all these mismatch of technologies. What would you say to them in terms of the next step? Like,
call me. No.
Yeah.
No, I kidding. It makes a lot of sense. What you need to do when you start doing a consolidation or a roll up of multiple companies, obviously establishing a cloud-based platform is one of the first things that you should do. So we work within this mergers and acquisitions community and work with a number of different advisory firms. And what they do like to do is make sure that they're doing their technical due diligence on any of their acquisitions. So many of them are running what I'll call starter systems, things like QuickBooks or no longer Peachtree. If they're running Peachtree, they haven't really innovated in a long time. Sage, some NetSuite, that type of thing, where they're just kind of using those introductory systems to run the business, and then keeping track of inventory and traceability and things like that, and maybe siloed or point type systems. And it really becomes important as you look to scale, which would be indicative of doing acquisitions, that you get a good consistent platform in place, and the solutions that we provide do just that. So as I refer to that company, that in the name of the company is TriRx Pharmaceuticals. They're a public reference for us. So they've actually gone out and done. They started with the plant in Alabama, in Huntsville. They then acquired a plant from a company I can't say, in France. Then they acquired two more plants, one in the UK and one in Kansas. And they've done that and could do that and roll those in and get them onto the same platform within a 3-month period, all because they had laid the foundation at the start. So really, a successful acquisition strategy has to be involving a good integration strategy of those companies that you're acquiring, and having the right platform in place is critical.
Well, and to your point, whether they're, acquiring or they're, launching new products, when you've got systems in place like that, it makes that process of, whether you're going FDA approval and launching your products, it's turnkey. It makes it so
Right.
much easier.
Well,
And
what it does is it flattens the whole curve, right? Because you don't have to make those decisions again, right?
right,
This is just how we do it. You have the manual to give rather than have to develop the manual each time.
right, yeah. And as far as like companies' growth, like, so sometimes they see it as an expense, right? Everything's an expense. if it's not coming through the door, it's going out the door.
Right.
So, they see it as, if we're going to invest in a change in our technology, it doesn't matter what it is, and we're going cloud-based, it's an expense. So how do you help them really grasp the concept of the ROI?
Yeah, and that's, as we're dealing with startups, that's a really important concept for people to grasp, because oftentimes they're running QuickBooks and they're running Excel or they're running Access, right? And so they're paying virtually nothing for technology. But what they don't understand is that $125,000 person that you have keying stuff into a spreadsheet, and the auditors that you have to pay to come in and figure out what went wrong with QuickBooks and that type of thing, those are all real costs as well. And so what we do is we kind of rationalize the value of the solution that they're going to put in place with the efficiencies that they're going to get. So that's really that. And as you take a look at it, if you're going to scale and if you're going to stay on the same platform, then there is going to be more manual work. More manual work means more people. And so, you can kind of map out and plot what the cost is and what really the break even cost becomes on the technological investment. If somebody is talking pure expense, quite frankly, we'll say we might not be the right fit for you.
Yeah.
Because this needs to be an investment, right? We know that you need to make an investment in some filling machines or some robotics automation on the plant floor. This needs to be considered the same type of investment in the business.
Right. Yeah, we're the same. If we come across a client that doesn't understand the investment of finding the best talent versus just hiring anybody, that you come across and they constantly have turnover, there's a disconnect there.
Right.
So, right, you have to see the value of working with professionals who can bring you the right individuals to help you grow your business. So, they're, just to your point, using technology versus, added expenses of the human capital. Whereas, that's not a salesperson you're putting in place or a marketer that's going to drive the revenue on the other end.
Right.
Right. So it's an easy sell.
Yeah,
It's easy to understand.
It becomes very difficult to hire the people who want to maintain spreadsheets and things like that as well.
Yeah, turnover is incredible.
Turnover and turnover, it has a cost unto itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Now we're starting to talk your business.
Yeah, exactly. It's don't get me started there. So, and you talked about startup and small companies. Where's your sweet spot? Where do you really like to help companies? That is it at 25 employees, 50 to 500? Where do you?
Anywhere. I would say that what we look at is where they are in their business cycle, right? So if they're usually, I would say if we're going to use an employee count, I would say 40. 40 would be kind of the starting point. The funding is really critical. If they're living, paycheck to paycheck, or hand to mouth as it is, they're not going to be able to make the right investment. We also like to make sure that the right people are in place, right? So that they have a good financial leader, call it a controller or a CFO or a VP of finance. And they have somebody who is equally as good on the supply chain. So, because we've done some systems implementations in too early a stage, where they were, and the project just got put on hold, right? And then they came back to it in a year when the organization had matured enough. And so what we look to do is try to more properly align where they are in their business process, where they are in their kind of life cycle of their business, with our entry point. And usually that is, they're in, phase 2, phase 3 of clinical trials. They can see on the horizon a date where they need to, consider commercialization. And that's usually what the profile looks like. So, as we take a look at it, oftentimes it's zero revenue, but it may be, they've got an investment of 25 to 40 million. They've got 40 to 60 employees, and they're really have a clear path to commercialization.
And then when you say the right people in place, what do you mean by that? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so again, you want to have a good financial leader. You want to have a good supply chain leader. Essentially, you need the 3 or 4 stakeholders. Obviously, regulatory, we need to have somebody in supply chain. That's usually a combination of maybe 2 people, somebody who's handling procurement and materials, and then the other who's handling production. And then there's usually the sales leader as well.
So meaning that they're part of the process, they're involved in the implementation. So it's
Yes.
not, that they're, so, sometimes the decision's made at the top, right? And there's been no involvement with them. So what you
Right.
do is you say, okay, this is our process. This is who we'd like to have within your
Exactly.
organization to be part of the decision making, implementation,
Mhm.
et cetera. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, so that's what we call
Yeah.
key users in the industry. They're commonly known as subject matter experts, SMEs,
Yeah.
as they're called.
Yeah.
Our industry, they try to give an acronym to everything.
Oh,
But yeah, and that's really the key, because those are the folks who are going to drive adoption, right? If they're doing it, then the people who work for them are going to do it.
Right.
And we rely on those people to really drive the adoption and train their people, because the last thing that we need is it's not Navigator's project. We're just there. You've heard me using the word enable. We're there to enable them to be able to use the system to improve their business.
Right.
They need to take ownership of the project itself.
Right. Yeah. Any funny stories or anything that you could share that you've had happen along the way that you thought it's interesting?
Well, I think there was the one time that one of our consultants got lost in the UK plant. So the UK plant of TriRx is it's in a very old part of Manchester, and it's a series of old mill buildings, and it's essentially a big brewery is what it is. I mean, they're just they're fermenting some ingredients and that type of thing. But we had a consultant lost for 2 hours. And his cell phone wouldn't work because it was in all the shielded in the big old brick building. So yeah, when he eventually emerged, we said, okay, you just stay at your desk and let's stop wandering around. So talking about the latest thing that's somewhat humorous, and that person gets picked on ruthlessly by the rest of the organization now.
Well, going into different industries that you're not familiar with, or just the idioms they have, or just the way that they practice, or not being familiar with cultures, or even the regulations, like going into some of the plants that all of a sudden you're wearing hard hat, hard boots. It's just
Absolutely.
different things are
jumping into a bunny suit because you're going into a clean room.
You bet.
All of those various things.
Yeah,
why do I have to wear anti-static shoes, and then I got to gown up completely, and then why do I got to put a beard net and all that?
Yeah. Meanwhile, your technology, you're not in the research and development phase of your business, but in working for them. But you feel like it sometimes. But it's the best way to understand your customer, right?
It is.
And
Being
what
face to face.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. A lot of companies try to sell remotely now, right? It's the cloud. You should be able to do it all remotely. I've been at this a long time. People buy from people, and that's because you and being face to face, you build that trust factor. And so that's a key component to working with Navigator. Is we don't do things just remotely. We do bring people on site. We do build personal relationships, And that's how you end up with the long-term relationships that you want to have with your trusted advisors.
Well, I think you make a good point there, because, a lot of times you can't uncover, what the thoughts are of each of the individual decision makers. And also too, that you can pick up things when you go, you feel the culture, you see what the layouts are, you see what their challenges are, you talk to some of the end users, you pick up a lot of other information that otherwise, having video conferencing doesn't necessarily give you that information, right?
That's right.
But I think it eliminates some of the doubt that customers have too. If they know that, you're going to come and visit them, talk to the different individuals and help them with that change management component. Because as you said, it's not just the technology you're implementing. And you and I had this conversation earlier this week about that it's sometimes one of the things that you have to work on first before you're even implementing or fulfilling completely your service is helping them with that change management component.
Practices concept right from the start. And that, we're really starting change management from the very first conversation.
Right. Yeah. And so what does that conversation, what is that like? What is it you say to customers about the change management?
Well, what we do is we acknowledge it up front, right? Probably the most difficult part of any implementation is change management. It's the management of change. And so what we like to do is make sure that at the very top levels of the organization, that they are behind the project, because you can't have something, some challenge going on in the project where you're trying to drive some change or manage some change and have them be able to go around the project and go, talk to their parents about, hey, they're making me try to do this, right? So right from the get-go, we're talking to the highest levels that we can get to about the fact that, hey, are you open to change? Are you open to best practices? This is not a new, if anybody's looking at systems, it's not a new concept, right? It's the concept of highly customized systems, and the costs that they put on an organization are now well known. And so best practices and can configure, not code, right? So we can change the behavior of the system, but it's still within the confines of best practices. And that just, it tends to kind of disarm people, if you will. When you're not asking them, how do you do this? And you're saying, this is how the system works. Then you can start to have a conversation of, well, I don't do it that way. Well, why don't you do it that way?
Right.
And now you can say, but can you see how you get to the same endpoint by doing it this way? Oh, yes, I can. So now that becomes an easier conversation.
So when you are having a conversation with the leadership, the decision makers on change management and what's important to having them committed to the process, and do you have touch points with them on a regular basis?
Yes.
To ensure that that's happening, because sometimes it's we are, I'm going to sign off on it and away we go. But you and I both probably had those experiences where that's the end of it. It doesn't trickle down. The buy-in's not there, and then you're stuck in a situation of having to sell every time to the individuals you're dealing with. That obviously the leadership haven't really explained why the change or your service is needed. So you get that bucking.
Well, when we're setting up a project and establishing the start of a project, what we're looking for is to have a steering committee at the company, and that steering committee can be the same people as the project team, but it does need to include the highest level of management as well, so that any challenges in the project are brought to the project team. They're defined. Their impact and materiality of their impact, the impact on people or money or cost or timeline are evaluated. And then a decision is made as a project steering team. And then the project steering team, that's really the governance you put around it, is you have the project steering committee as really being the place where the buck stops, right? That's the final decision point. And then that decision is driven into the project manager to execute within the project. So really having that project steering team or committee is one of the key elements to being able to properly manage change.
Yeah, and I can see that. So that sounds like you've had all the experiences. You put everything in place for an organization to be successful, and I think that that's what's important is to understand the value of what you can do for them and how important it is to have cloud-based technology, what that can do for you for your current business, and if you're growing or acquiring businesses, I think it's fantastic. And being in the life sciences industry, I know I've had lots of clients ask me about that, and didn't have anybody to recommend other than companies from outside the industry. But I think now making the connection with you, this will be fantastic for our listeners, and to be able to recommend to my clients who are looking to make a change there. So it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's great to interact with you as well, Linda. As we discussed earlier in the week, I think there's some people I can turn you on to as well. There's always a constant desire for talent, right?
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you being here, and I'm sure our listeners do too. And wish you the best of luck in the life sciences industry, because it is fantastic. As you know, I've been doing it a long time, and I'm as passionate about it as you've become. So good luck.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Great.